Australia's Labour Prime Minister, John Curtin.
I'm happy to be back in Australia. I've seen many things and many places. And although every man can be forgiven for loving his own country best, I believe it is an impartial assessment of the facts to say that I have not seen any country or any people better than my own.
Welcome to Curtin's Cast, the John Curtin Research Centre's podcast, brought to you by myself, Nick Dyrenfirth, and Redbridge's Cos Samaras. Each fortnight, we bring you the freshest and most challenging conversations with leaders, activists, and thinkers from the world of Australian and global politics, culture, and ideas. Welcome, everybody. Yasso, Decanas. Welcome to the latest episode of Curtin's Cast, the JCRC's podcast of politics, culture, and idea, hosted by myself, Nick Dyrenfirth, and my great mate, Cos Samaras, comrade Cos, Kung Fu Cos. Cos. Yasso, Decanas. This is I've introduced a Greek angle in a nod to your Greek heritage today, because this is a multicultural edition of Curtin's Cast. We've got an Australian with Scottish and Ashkenazi Jewish heritage. We've got you, a Greek Australian. Would you call yourself a Greek Australian, an Australian Greek? Just a Greek.
Greek Australian.
Fabulous. And we have a wonderful guest today. We're going to really jump straight into here. We've got Di Ley, who is an Australian politician. She is the federal member for Fowler in Sydney's West. And she's also a councillor for Fairfield, Cabravale Ward. I'm going to ask Di about that in a moment. A really fascinating backstory. She arrived in 1979 to Australia as a refugee from the Vietnam War after fleeing Saigon in April 1975. She was a journalist with the ABC and elected as a councillor for the city of Fairfield in 2012. And in 2022, at the 2022 Australian federal election, she shocked the nation, successfully running as an independent candidate for Fowler, and has been the member for Fowler ever since, and is now recontesting as the sitting member. Di Ley, Xin Chao.
Yasu. So you got two Greeks, so I might say a few. I do know Yasu. Hello. Very
multicultural. Wonderful to have you on Curtin's Cast. Absolutely wonderful. You were schooling me in Vietnamese. How did I go there? I'm not going to try and say how are you in Vietnamese.
I got
it before.
No, you were very good. I have to say, I don't even think my German-born Australian husband can even say the Xin Chao. So
yes,
you did well.
Yes. And it's Di Ley. So we were talking about this as well. Di Ley is just the lazy, skippy way of saying her name. Is that right?
Well, I'll put it down to over the decades, obviously, when we first arrived, my full name actually is Lê Thị Trang Đài, which is normally Vietnamese. There's always, for female, there's always a THI in the name. And it drives the Department of Immigration and Home Affairs crazy, because at citizenship ceremonies, all the new citizens has to start with THI, T something, and everybody thinks their name is THIT, but it's actually not. It's just a word that kind of denotes that you're a female. But so my name is Lê Thị Trang Đài, and of course, over the years and when I got into journalism, I thought, well, I'm not going to write on the byline as Lê Thị Trang Đài. I thought, well, how am I going to shorten this so that people can actually, when you go and you interview people, you say your name. At home, I'm called Di. So that's why I thought, well, Di Ley.
We're just going to call you Di today. And it is a real pleasure. It's a real honour to have you here. And another formal welcome to Cos. We could talk about Vietnam all day. And I do want to ask about your family backstory. I'm going back to Vietnam for the third time this September with my children. I love it. I love the food, the people, the culture, the natural environment, just so stunning, so diverse. Food, did I mention I love the food?
Yes, I love the food too.
Shame about the Communist Party running the joint, but we can talk about that as well. So tell me about your backstory. How did Di Ley manage to come to Australia and achieve all the tremendous things that you've achieved in this great country, including becoming a politician? The first Vietnamese Australian elected to the House of Representatives, I should add.
Yeah, the federal level. Yes, I mean, I believe me, it wasn't a goal. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't something that I kind of put on my radar to do when I got to Australia. But yeah, look, just briefly, obviously, for those of you who know of a bit about my background, when the war ended in Vietnam in April '75, my father had disappeared during the war, so it was just mum and the three of us. And all I remember was that we were basically, rounded up by some people from military, wearing military outfits. And I remember riding my little tricycle in the front yard. That's a vivid memory of mine. And just people screaming and running, and so suddenly we just left. We just literally ran out of that house, and people grabbing myself and my mum grabbing my younger sister, and an auntie grabbed my middle sister, and we just ran into this Jeep that was waiting outside our house. And I remember as that Jeep was moving down, because we had no idea what was going on.
Yeah.
And as that Jeep was moving out of our street, I remember seeing people running, and I had no idea why people were running. As a 7-year-old, you really couldn't figure out what was going on. I just remember getting onto this boat, and thousands of people scrambling onto this boat. And over the years,
it's okay.
I can't. So God,
it's okay.
So funny. You think that you're
over it. I know.
You're over it, but you can never get over it whenever you talk about it. So over the years, whenever I watched some of those documentaries or films or TV news of people scrambling up this big boat, and I always imagined whether or not I was one of those kids, because I remember my mum, people pushing us up this boat, and I got up and of course found my mother later, because for a moment I thought I lost her. And I remember looking back and seeing this huge explosion, a big mushroom of smoke in the distance, and I thought that we were bombed. But decades on, when I became a journalist and I made a documentary on Operation Baby Lift, the airlift of orphans out of Vietnam at the end of the war, I saw this footage, and I thought, you know what, this footage reminded me so much of that scene when I left Vietnam. And I wonder to this day whether or not we left around the same time in the C-5 airplane that took, I think, thousands of babies crashed. But so we left, and we were taken to the Philippines, where a lot of the Vietnamese were there, and we were supposed to go to the United States. And we were there for a few years, about 3 years, I think. And my mother, my late mum, who passed away 2 years ago, decided one night to take the three of us on another boat. Again, I was by that stage 10, did not know what was going on. As a daughter of a Vietnamese mother, you just listen, you don't question, you don't ask, you just follow your elders. And it wasn't midnight. We waded ourselves in the water onto this tiny boat. There were about 36 people, including us, on this tiny fishing boat, and had no idea what my mother was doing. And we spent about 10 days, I think, on that boat. And of course, we went through a huge storm, nearly died there. We hit a coral reef. An amazing scene had happened there when this huge, I think it was a whale or a dolphin that came to edge our boat off the coral reef, because we were caught in a coral reef. That was the most magical moment in that boat trip for me. And then pirates came on our boat, and eventually we were pulled into Hong Kong, where we stayed for about I think 9 months. Got processed there. My mother applied to go to the US, and we were accepted to go to the US.
Yeah.
But then one night I was coming back from work. I was working. I was 10, but I was working in a factory. And Mum said to me on the gate when she met me to bring me in, she goes, "Oh, I know that you are looking forward to go to the States, but I've changed my mind, and I think we're not going to go to the United States. There's an island. I've been told there's an island called Australia, and apparently it had the best.
An
it
island.
has the best.
An island continent.
An island. That's right. It had the best education system in the world. As a 10-year-old, what can you say? I mean, that was my mother's decision, and she said, I don't know how long before we get processed, whether or not it's going to take longer, but I've made a decision for your education." A 10-year-old, sure, yeah, means yes, Mum,
Yeah.
And of course, I think within months or something, we were processed, and that was under when Malcolm, I think,
Fraser.
when I studied the history, Malcolm Fraser opened the doors to Vietnamese refugees back then. And so we arrived in December 79, and went to migrant hostel in Fairmeadow. Just knew how to say hello because we had...
G'day or hello?
Hello. We had American missionaries teaching us English while we were in the camp. So I think we knew how to say hello, good morning. But, of course, English, we couldn't speak English when we got here. And, the first thing I did was we were enrolled in a school and learned English and tried to integrate as quickly as possible. And, yeah.
I was going to say classic migrant story, but it's more than that. And thank you for sharing that. It's wonderful. You nearly made me cry. Please don't do that again. I live in Balaclava in Melbourne. Balaclava boys do cry. The last time I cried actually was, a similar theme. I watched, I don't know whether you've seen Anthony Hopkins, who stars in One Life.
No.
It's about the rescue of Czech Jewish child refugees from Nazi-occupied Prague and Europe. And yeah, I was a blubbering mess after that, mainly because it really did make me, I just thought at the exact time, this is like just before World War II, the outbreak of World War II, this sort of October 1939, at the very same time my grandmother was trying to get the hell out of Berlin and Germany, and she did in October 1939. It was so evocative, it was so vivid. I was able to sort of place myself in her shoes for an hour and a half, and yes, it reduced me to tears, this tough balaclava boy.
That's good. You got emotions. It's excellent.
Yes. I know some people say I don't have a heart, but I do. Thank you for sharing that. It is an incredible story, and I'm so glad that your mum sounds amazing and persistent, resilient, and courageous. So what was your childhood like growing up in Australia in this strange place? And you obviously went on to become, start your working life as a journalist. We won't hold that against you. Some of Cos and I, some of our best friends are journos. It's actually what I wanted to do growing up. It's two things I wanted to be: a journo and a politician.
Really?
And I haven't done either. Kind of.
Oh well, I tell you,
there.
I stumbled into journalism and I stumbled into politics. So it must be the universe kind of helped navigate me. It wasn't, like most migrant parents, and my mother wanted me to be a lawyer. Most refugee or migrant parents want their children to become either a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, a pharmacist, a chemist, anything, any profession, other than they've never heard of a journalist. They've never heard of it, and definitely in the Vietnamese, they don't want anything to do with politics because of the war. So those two roles or professions, I don't know if they're called professions, but those two, roles, just something that wasn't really a conversation that, I grew up.
So there wasn't politics around, obviously it wasn't politics around the kitchen table, no?
My mother was working in the kitchen, cleaning houses, couldn't speak English. We had to learn how to speak English. We had to learn how to adapt, in a new society. So there's no time to discuss politics. It's about really survival. It's for my mum making sure that there's food on the table, that her kids were educated. So no, my world was very closed, very closed.
And did you know who Malcolm Fraser was, the Prime Minister who had... No, but you must be immensely grateful to he and the government.
I am very immensely grateful for the fact that, he opened the doors for Vietnamese refugees. And again, you don't know those things until later on in life. And as a journalist, is when I delved into those kind of stories more that I kind of got to appreciate my history and how I got here. But yeah, so, politics wasn't discussed. I was not allowed to ask questions at home. You don't question your parent. And when I went to school, I was a very quiet child. I don't question the teachers. Very obedient. I listened. I, revered authorities. I am everything opposite to what I am today.
So how did you morph into Dai Lei? How did you get involved in politics then? I know you were a member of the Liberal Party for a long time. So why did you join?
For a short time.
Short time.
Short time. I tell you, when people say it's long, I'm thinking, what's long? It's like a piece of string. But I was a journalist. I started my life as a journalist here in Liverpool, Fairfax Community newspaper. I just landed that job by accident, looking for a job, kind of dropped out on law, did not feel like I belonged really. I felt really out of place, couldn't navigate, didn't know what to do with my life. I just knew I had to work to earn some money to provide, to help my mum. So then, a job came along. I applied and I got the job as an ethnic cadet, and I did not know what the ethnic part was, because I'm thinking, what does ethnic mean? Back in those days, I'm thinking, what does ethnic mean? And then the guy who was offering me the job goes, "Oh, ethnic, you're an ethnic." I said, "Oh, I thought I was an Australian." He goes, "No, you're an ethnic." And I think that was in the early 90s. That's when
even in the 90s, it's really interesting.
1991.
Yeah,
that's when I started to kind of get exposed to the differentiation of me being an ethnic to being an Australian, because I always thought once I became an Australian citizen in, I think, 86, I was proud Australian, and then suddenly I became an ethnic reporter, and I thought, okay, well, it's because of what I look, then that's fine. I'll if I get the job, that's fine. And I was covering ethnic stories in our area here in Cabramatta. Yes, I did that. Worked and set up the local Fairfield Champion in the papers here, helped set it up. And then I went to the ABC. So I worked at the ABC from about 94 to about 2008. But all during that period, I saw my community here in Cabramatta initially as being really taken for granted, because I feel like there wasn't a voice in our community. Like, I saw how hardworking they were, but I thought, why aren't we seeing any progress in terms of infrastructure? This is back in those period when I was here, and I feel like I thought we had representations. I thought we had members of parliament, state and federal. Council wasn't something that was in my mind, but I thought, why aren't we hearing people advocating for our community? And then 2008, there was a by-election here in Cabramatta, and it was during the shopping in Cabramatta, and the ethnic communities, especially the Asian, don't normally complain about politicians. And as I was walking around the market, I would hear people talking about, oh my God, we can't believe that, because Reba Ma had been parachuted in to represent Cabramatta, and again, she was from, I think, Bondi or somewhere, represented for 13 years, right? So she was for 13 years. And then when she then resigned as a minister, she then resigned her member of parliament, and people felt like, oh, why can't you stay to represent? You're making us go to the election again. My husband, I think he's probably cursing himself now. He said to me, I think you should be a voice for your community. I think you can go out there and advocate. I said, I can't. I'm a journalist, It's through journalism I learned to ask questions and all that. I said, I can't do that. He goes, oh, yeah, you can. And I thought, well, I can't. Labor, it's terrible for the community. They have not done anything. And I thought, forget about the Greens. And I thought, well, certainly the Liberal, like, really, they have not really campaigned out here, but I don't know if I can align with many of the values and policies. And I thought, you know what? let's be not judgmental. I should just step in and explore and find the
Yeah, have a
opportunity
go.
and understand the party more, because it's about liberalism, right? It's about freedom of speech. It's about supporting small business. It's about supporting individuals' right to speak out, to practice their religious belief, and it's just that freedom. I thought to myself, well, the Liberal Party under Malcolm Fraser gave families like mine the opportunity to come to Australia and rebuild our lives, and maybe there's something there. So yeah, that's how I 2008 I said, look, I'm interested to run for Cabramatta. The party has never heard of me, don't know who I was, it's 2008, and by 2016, that was 8 years on, then they start to expel me from the party, and so that's my long association with the Liberal Party.
Can I ask why not Labor? So you had a perception that Labor didn't do anything for the community. Now, from my view, I'm not a progressive, Di. I'm not a progressive. I want to put that clear. I'm Labor. Yep. I'm a union member. My values and what I think are Labor values are Australian values: family, work, and community. And loving your community and loving your nation and wanting to put in as much as you get out. So they're my values. It sound like your values. You've got the family. I'm not sure if that's a tissue box or something in the background. Why not Labor? Can we bring you over?
Yeah, because I think growing up here, Labor has represented this area, and seeing how they've never actually done, first of all, the representation of Labor back in those days, and majority of them still today, were predominantly white men and white women. So I thought, really, how do they relate to a multicultural community like Cabramatta? I was not thinking federal at all, so I was just thinking mainly state level. And there was a car park in Cabramatta which I campaigned on, and I thought, that car park was built in 1986, right? In 2008, they still had that one car park. I said, really? And this is supposed to be a safe Labor seat. And I'm thinking, when you're safe, shouldn't you be able to advocate more for your community? And as a journalist, my journalist hat on, I have kept, whoever was in power or owning the seat to say, well, why haven't you done more for the community? And because they did not do what are, in my view, from my perspective, much for the community, why shouldn't I join that? Because obviously that party did not really care for the community that they said they were supposed to be for: the workers, for the families, for community.
It's a very common mindset that you find within diverse electorates across the country now. Where if you speak, Nick, if you go out there and you speak to, whether it's in outer Western Sydney, whether it's in parts of Melbourne, where there are working class, diverse communities, what Di's just articulated is I've heard that 1,000 times.
Yeah, you've been beating the drums, banging the drums
for 8 years.
On this, and you say that it predates COVID, but COVID really exacerbated this feeling.
That's right. Well, I mean, it was. If you look at the I'd be interested in your thoughts here, Di, around the pandemic and the way different communities were treated, even to the point where the advertising to encourage you to do the right thing, and then eventually the vaccine program was initially just all white people. We had here in Melbourne, there was one good example of that, where they couldn't get the young and elderly Somali community to embrace the vaccine program, and then they went and asked them, and the old mums basically said, "Well, it looks like this disease is your problem, because it's all I see on the advertisements is these white people with, doing the right thing with the pandemic and taking the vaccine." So they thought it had nothing to do with them, right? So it's interesting.
Well, so from my take here around the pandemic was that obviously, for me, Southwest Sydney, the people were actually the engine of this New South Wales economy, if not the country. You know, the transport workers,
100%.
those who work in factories of food processing, all of that.
People who have to leave their house to work.
Yes.
They can't send an
They
email.
have to leave the house
They
to
can't
work.
send an email.
And that's the majority. These are the majority of people who are actually at the back of this economy, right? It's not the office workers, it's not, you know, the bureaucrats who gets paid so much money. It's the factory workers, the retailers, the transport workers, the rail workers, the teachers, the nurses. These are the people. And so what happened during the pandemic, there are a few things. The people who escaped war-torn countries like myself, I remember in the middle of the night, helicopters hovering above us. I said to myself, suddenly it triggered. I'm thinking, oh my God, this is just like, I remember during the Vietnam War, like I remember hearing helicopters, and it's really, and you, in your mind you think, hang on, of course we're in, I live here and it's safe, but it's just that triggered the suddenly, I feel unsafe. Like you know, your body gets triggered. That's for me, and that's somebody who's quite informed, who's trying to reconcile in her mind to remind herself that she's actually in a safe place and try to overcome that fear that she's not back in her war-torn country. And then there are people who've escaped Khmer Rouge regime, for instance. I get calls from Cambodian, families of Cambodian background who said to me, Di, what do I do? You know, they're so scared. The police are knocking on our doors, and it just reminded them so much of the time when they had to hide away from the Khmer Rouge. You know, they were coming to take people away and killing.
It's really interesting that you use the phrase knocking on the door. My dad, who's now in his 80s, hi, Dad, you want me not to talk about him again. Dad actually used that phrase in the early days of the pandemic, where, you know, there was the first lockdowns and there was sort of people checking whether you'd return from lockdown. He used a phrase which was known amongst, you know, European Jewish refugees, was waiting for the knock on the door. And I said, Dad, you know, born in 1943, I said, Dad, what are you talking about? And it's only really, you know, I twigged just after. It's like got this visceral, it's very vivid for people.
It is. It's people knocking on
son
doors.
of Holocaust survivors. Yeah, who told those first-hand stories.
It's also, I think the response and the way governments managed it in this country, they did what they had to do and so on. But we go back to that fundamental problem is I think the governments of all colours have a really bad blind spot for millions of Australians' background and where they've come from and what has made them come to this country and that experience, right? And so, you know, I used the Somali example, but there are other examples of people just being really, really scared about vaccine programs, because vaccine programs in some of the developing parts of the world were quite nasty and you were taught from a very young age never to allow anyone to put a needle in your arm.
Absolutely.
Right?
It's huge here. I mean, like people were saying that, you know, you cannot go to work. You are forced to get vaccinated. You lose your jobs because you don't get vaccinated. You need a travel permit to get out of this area in order to go to work. Like, it's sort of reminiscent. I mean, that's what I made in my maiden speech. We felt like we were living in this communist-controlled society when we're supposed to have escaped those, dictatorial regime, you know, to in search of freedom. And suddenly, I think the COVID period really, in our community in particular, people suddenly woke up to the fact that, hang on, the government is actually not governing for us. They're telling us what to do. They're imposing this kind of martial law on us. They're knocking on our doors. They're having helicopters hovering above us. They're chasing our kids. They're forcing us to take travel permits to get out of, you know, you can't go 5 kilometres beyond. And both Labor and Liberal none of the members of Parliament of those major parties really questioned and stood up and speak up for the community. So people, I think, at that time switched then in terms of what trust can I place in this government when the behavior and the tactics that they used really brought back memories of those governments that we escaped from. So that, I think that period really pivoted the way that people, especially in Western and Southwest Sydney, viewed government overall.
Yeah, but you said people woke up. They woke up and they put you into Parliament. Die.
The thing is, same happened in Melbourne. You know, I think the political consequences of what happened via those lockdowns, we saw in 2022 at the federal election. So what happened in your electorate actually occurred in Melbourne as well. Only the incumbent MPs didn't lose their seats, but their primaries were completely annihilated. And it's continuing now in Melbourne. So at the upcoming federal election, in these diverse electorates, we're going to see another hit, because it goes to your point, Di, which is they've not just woken up, they've realised they are treated differently.
Yep,
right?
Absolutely.
And it's
they're treated like
representation.
Yeah, I said it treated as like second-class citizens. I think that their tokenistic gesture should be called out. Their approach is about, coming out promising millions just prior to an election. People are now seeing through all of that. I don't think the political campaigning that government or whoever is campaigning, government opposition, the way that they're campaigning now is the same way that they campaigned prior to social media, prior to COVID, right? So today, the way that you campaign, you have to really think, how connected are the issues you're campaigning on? How connected you are to the community? And so therefore, for me, being on council has given me that opportunity to stay connected to my community in order for me to speak to the real issues. I don't go up there and fluff about things that has no direct link to the lives of families and workers here in Fowler. So everything I do, I make sure that it comes from the people. And I think the Labor Party, it was supposed to be a party for the people. So when I got elected, the first thing I asked the government to do was tackle the cost of living. I said, what will you do around the cost of living? This is back in 2022. And I said, will you cut the fuel excise, the fuel excise tax cut, cut the fuel excise? No, we can't do it because of the budget. I said, well, I asked the questions to the Treasurer, I asked the question to Prime Minister. And that is the great thing about being an independent, which I discovered, even though some media or the government will say otherwise. But you know what? I'm not giving a question before question time to ask them. I'm there. I door knock and I engage with my community, and I know and I hear from the grassroots what it is that's impacting them. So for 12 months after my election, that's all I ask. And I tell you, those first 12 months, I felt like I was sounding really strange, other than because English is my second language, was sounding really strange. And because all of them in that house were focusing on one thing, which was the voice referendum. And I was the only one that asked questions around the cost of living. And I thought, am I being really out of touch with what they're talking about?
I was going to ask you about, so it's like, is the bubble real, Di? The bubble is real. It's,
the bubble
how
is
has it
very
been,
real.
What are your impressions of Parliament?
Well, like the first 12 of 18 months, it kind of made me question, oh my God, am I asking the right questions?
What am I doing
because,
here? Yeah.
What am I doing here? Because they're talking about something else and I'm talking about something else so completely different. And I tell you, I felt such this burst of relief when in the beginning of 2024, they started to talk about the cost of living finally. I'm thinking, oh, right. I'm thinking, oh, maybe I'm just ahead of time. But now everybody's talking about the cost of living. It's not about just talking about it. They should have done something about it as soon as they got elected. And they still do, a lot of them still talk about, now just the last few weeks of sitting, when people ask me in there, oh, what are you going to focus on? I said, well, what I've been focused on for the last 3 years. I said, now you guys are focusing on it, but let's have actual real policies that actually come out and filter down and actually make a difference. But I think the system is there, and they operate the same way that they've operated. And this election will see the results. It depends on how the results will come out. And I think polling and all that stuff, don't get the seats in Western Sydney, and I don't know what Melbourne is like, their cost, but Western Sydney, especially the migrant communities, you can't poll them. You know, you can't ring them up and
Hard
ask
to
them.
get to, yep.
Hard to get to. So you cannot poll seats like Fowler, McMahon, Werriwa, Watson, Blaxland. You know, so it'd be interesting to watch.
Or
even Parramatta.
When we poll a seat, for example, an individual seat, we use what's called a caddy, right, which is a computer-aided telephone interview process, live interviews, a person in a call centre, either out of Tassie or Western Australia. To do a diverse electorate, whenever people say to me, can you, do a caddy if I was to do one in Fowler, I haven't done one, I say, well, the price will be double because you're going to have to try to get diverse communities on the phone, and you're going to struggle with some cultural barriers there too, right? Because people generally are not going to want to talk to you about politics. Right?
No, absolutely.
Right? So that's, absolutely fundamentally agree with you there. They are almost impossible to correctly poll. That will become, Nick, a problem for the Labor Party in the years to come as their diverse electorates become more and more marginal.
It is a problem for the Labor Party. It's also a problem for the Liberal Party. Why aren't the major parties both attracting people like you, Di, fabulous politician, why aren't they attracting you, getting you to stay and putting you into Parliament? What's the answer? Is it, on a controversial note, I've called for working class quotas for the Labor Party because I think we've got a problem with the people you described earlier who have to leave home to work. We're not putting enough of those people into Parliament. We're putting the sons and daughters of those types of people into Parliament.
Nick, we're putting zero in the Parliament of that background.
Do we need, to use your phraseology, do we need ethnic quotas? What are the major parties doing wrong, and how can we address this problem?
No, look, I don't think. I think first of all, I don't think quotas will genuinely.
I'm not a quota fan, by the way. It was a provocation.
Neither am I. But I think the quota will make it. The women's movement have said to me, well, because of quota, we were able to break through the female or the gender barrier, which probably for mainly Anglo Celtic, women or women of very privileged background to be able to break through it. But even for an ethnic woman,
you can use that term.
It takes, and I said it to the young people that I mentor, predominantly from cultural diverse backgrounds here. It's their self-limiting belief and their self-barrier, and a lot of people who've seen the journey that I have made since 2008 and have seen how both Labor and Liberal have really attacked me out here, they've said, oh my God, I don't know how you can do that because there's no way we can, do that. Because the cultural barriers also stop us from putting ourselves forward. We don't want to be attacked. Both parties creating dirt files, shit files. If there's nothing there, they're still creating those shit files and dirt files. I call them shit files.
That's what they are.
Yeah, that's what they are, and making those lies up anyway. And so people, especially the ethnic community, will say, oh, we don't want anything. We don't want a bar of that. We just want to make money, have a business,
look after our family.
We have lives, make money. That's what our parents want us to make money. So it's very hard to get the people who are of culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds to step into these kind of very adversarial roles. And like I said before, I was a very quiet person, and it has taken me years to really build up the courage to really go adversarial. And in Parliament, I'm often very quiet, and my questions often is a soft question, but targeted question.
It's incredibly noisy in there. It is. I don't think
it is.
Most Australians have not sat in a question time. It is
incredibly
noisy.
Yeah. But I love it when they call the honourable member for Fowler, the room is silent.
So I want to ask you about. So you obviously knocked off
Christina
Keneally. I should say Christina is a friend of mine. She's been
Nick.
She's been a good supporter of the John Curtin Research Centre. No, don't be sorry. That's politics. She's also a migrant who made something herself, and she became premier do you have friends on the other side of politics? I wonder, are the Labor MPs still standoffish, or do you actually have genuine friendships with people across the parties? Anyone you dislike?
You have respect. What I do, respect for everybody that's in that house. I mean, that's probably being a journalist. I get along a lot with everybody. I have kind of, form an unlikely alliance with Bob Catter.
Everyone loves Bob. Everyone loves Bob.
I love Bob. Bob loves to see me back, and so Bob and I.
Bob's got a Lebanese background as well.
Yes, he said he's a black fella. He's been telling me that he's a black fella. And we have a really good friendship, I would say. And, I get along very well. I've got some amicable, good friendship with the likes of Rebecca Sharkey, Helen Haynes, Andrew G., Anne Ali. When there's a celebration at our Lunar New Year or our Moon Festival, I give MPs on both sides the cakes and moon cakes, a little red envelope, and they've never seen that before. So they say, "Oh my God!" Anne Ali, Michelle Rowland, Amanda Rishworth. So some of those women I connected well with. Understanding politics is politics, but they're humans. Sort of at the end of the day, I make sure that I separate the two. This
theme's come up a couple of times in our conversation. You go back to, when you're growing up here, your mum said you must go to school because I want you to become X. It's that thing about diverse communities, working class diverse communities. Our parents, were desperate to see us move away from our class, right?
Yeah.
So this is about this working class aspiration that is absolutely integral and centre to every diverse community in this country. I think the political class in this country really doesn't understand that. They think that everyone's happy to stay where they are. They're not. They want to make money. You made the point, right? I think that is a common thing that is overlooked, and that is, and I think it's becoming more and more pronounced now with younger diverse Australians, where they are a lot more attracted to that form of aspiration, but also any of the politics around it as well. So I think, Nick, this is where I think, the Labor side of politics got a problem, and
we need to listen. Yeah,
young diverse voters in particular have just got a totally different values framework.
Yeah, the aspirational, and a lot of the people in my community aren't really engaged in politics in the first place. Of course, you go out to a big group of soccer mums and dads, for instance, in Lansville United Club, where I just went to recently. Mums and dads are volunteering after a long day's work to ensure that their kids are playing soccer, keeping fit, and being in the community. They don't talk about politics the way that, the Australian probably, maybe Australian actually don't even talk about politics, the wider Australian community, because they're working, they're trying to make ends meet. It's only the political class. We sit and we analyse, we talk, and we, talk about policies. But the majority of people are just trying to live their lives. So all they know is that they don't even know how to vote properly. They don't even know how to vote properly.
Yeah.
So that's some simple thing like that. So, and it's not just the ethnic communities; it's also the wider Australian-born community here who get confused with the different system that we have from local, state, and federal, and different states as well have different voting system. There's no uniformity at all in our system, and that's where obviously the inefficiencies are because of the lack of some kind of coordination for both state and territories and federal and local. So there's so many things that is not right, and it confused our community, and it confused an area like Southwest Sydney where there's working class, English is a second language, low social economic backgrounds, and people just trying to go to work to provide for their families. And if our government, especially a Labor government, don't even know that, then they're so disconnected from our community. I don't know why they need to put out a disconnect policy for when they're already disconnected, right? They have the right to disconnect. They're already disconnected.
Well, you're connected.
I don't know why they have that policy.
You're connected to your community. Can I ask you, as we begin to wrap up, you're a role model. Do you see yourself as a role model for young ethnics and Vietnamese Australians?
That's a 90s word. We're now cold.
That's right. Reverse.
You are a role model. Do you see yourself as? How does it feel to be a role model to Vietnamese Australians and I guess particularly young female Vietnamese Australians?
It's not just Vietnamese. I mean, I feel really humbled because I go out and, be it the Assyrian Australian community, the Chaldean, the Vietnamese, the Laotian, the Cambodian, Filipino, Pacific Islanders, you name it, we have them here. And those young people see that obviously English, I came here and I couldn't speak English and I was speaking English in front of them and they said, oh my God, you can. And, I'm approachable. A lot of I go to so many schools. I visited 40 out of 50 schools in my electorate last year. And I love engaging with the young people because it takes me back to that time when I was at, year 5 when I first started school here. And I know what school can provide and can do for young people. And so, I feel really humble when they see me. They say, oh, Miss Lee, take photos with you. And they love it.
Selfie. Do you take the
selfie? I take selfie. I even do TikTok dancing with them.
I can't do selfies. Oh, you do TikTok? We're on TikTok, Curtin RC. Cos is on TikTok, but Cos now knows this. Cos is turning into a TikTok superstar. It's totally crazy.
You have to follow me. Most of the things you can see me is dancing with the young kids, so they love that. But I also talk about, that's the way to engage with them because they don't engage in politics. How do you engage with politics? Someone who actually that they can relate to. I look different. For the Asian kids, I look Asian to them. For the kids who are not Asian, they know that I'm my refugee background, that I've learned English here. A lot of those, from the Middle East who came here in the last 10 years, refugees from Syria and Iraq, they're learning to speak English here, so they know they love my story whenever I share it with them. So I think it gives them hope. So that there's somebody who sounds like them and somebody who sounds like their parents.
Looks like them, yeah.
And looks like them. He's not perfect. I'm not perfect. So that means they have an opportunity to make a difference in our community.
Cos and I aren't perfect, but you have been almost the perfect guest on Curtin's Cast.
Thanks, Luke.
Dalai, thank you so much. It has been a tremendous honour and privilege. Thank you for sharing your story. Good luck, but not too much.
You.
Good luck with the election campaign. You are a testament to the very best in Australian society. So thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity. And I hope we'll catch up again down the track, maybe during the election somewhere down the track.
We would love that. And thank you to listeners for tuning in to Curtin's Cast episode 7. We will see you next time around.